It's kind of a unique deal, and if you understand dairies, dairies apply manure for the most part chasing nitrogen. And nitrogen is the most volatile thing in it, obviously. And so trying to capture N and hold N in manure pits, pack piles, loose beds, whatever it is, it's constantly volatilizing. So that N content is going down because it's getting robbed by the carbon content, and the more complex carbon content, the higher the N tie-up. And so that nitrogen is being used to break down the carbon structures, and most carbon structures in manure are the densest carbon structures, so it takes more N to break those down because the cow utilizes the simple carbon structures. So you've got this heavy nitrogen tie-up, and you've got a ticking time bomb to the application. So they're chasing this N, and the byproduct is the phosphorus. And the phosphorus is a cation, so it's held in the soil. It doesn't translocate. The only way it goes into the water is through erosion. Okay, very little of it moves. And if we can eliminate some of those problems, bring back a nitrogen source in a little more of its stabilized raw form, and then stabilize that N, it's a lot easier to stabilize that with a manure stabilizer than it is a carbon-based manure. Okay. The carbon is great for doing it, but there's a heavy tie-up. So what we're hoping is that we will actually see a more uniform nitrogen application, because that's what the farmers are trying to chase. They're chasing this N thing. They don't want to buy commercial fertilizer, but in the backside, phosphorus is building up, chasing the N. So what I hope is that we're going to be able to stabilize the product coming back to the farm a lot easier, and we're not going to see near the nitrogen infiltration into the soil. It's going to be, you can treat it more like a fertilizer because it's going to be more consistent. Good luck. There's a test after this. So,
I tried to get this done before Tom starts it.
there you go. So, but that is the hopes, and I really think this could be a way to do that, because we know other anaerobic digesters that we've done this with, and it does create an easier product to use, and a more uniform and an easier to stabilize source that we can control that nutrient situation. So we'll find out. Mm-hmm. That's the one thing I still haven't pinpointed is exactly in there, because they use a little different process. They go to 127 degrees, and a lot of aerobic digesters only go to about 102, 105. So I'm curious as to what comes out of that. Is it any different than what we've seen out of Fair Oaks or Riverview or some of these other places out of their digesters?
It's a very interesting project.
It is, yeah.
We're gonna go tour an anaerobic digester in the sewer, I think in May sometime. County board.
Whose is that one?
I can look it up in my email, but I can't remember off the top of my head.
Trying to think of who's up there, and that's General Mills is there, but.
It's not that company. It's not that Danish company, but that Danish company did present to our physical development board. Very impressive company.
It is a very impressive company. If you can make something like that work in a country with all the rules and regulations like Denmark, that's kind of the way I look at it. You know,
Sure.
You got 13 of them things around it. Denmark's pretty.
Denmark landfills only 3% of their waste too, so Denmark is really
They're very,
ahead of the curve.
yeah. And I had that brought up, for a foreign company, and that's what I told them. I said, they're probably ahead of us.
Oh yeah, they're ahead of us. And Homestead County is interested in that, a possibility of anaerobic digester for down by our waste energy facility, because we'd like to separate out the carbon-based things before it goes into the burner and see if we can do that. But the problem is that manure is much more efficient, so if you have that thing in Lewiston, the restaurants and the school and stuff, like, we'll be able to get rid of their food waste to it too, but it doesn't have enough energy to make it worthwhile. So it's got to be supplemented by the manure. The manure is the key.
Yep.
We don't have enough dairy farms other than Garland.
Well, yeah, Garland and what's their names? Starts with a D.
Daly.
Well, not Daly's. No.
D&D.
Not D&D. They're over here. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
We don't.
Well, was there talk about bringing food waste from Mayo and other places over to this?
Yep.
I think so.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, because as a standalone, it never worked, but, yeah, so, yeah, that's a big deal going on for North County. Wow, that was a really long board report.
I know we as a board signed off in support of that as they're going up to the state of Minnesota trying to get some financing too, so.
Sure.
I think the Winona County Board didn't support it though.
It never went to the county board.
I don't,
I don't
it
think
never
was
went to the
action,
county
but-
board,
Well, there
but
was.
I
I don't
gotta,
think it was a board action,
No.
but I think they approached the board and didn't get support, so.
yeah, there was never a board action on it, but my fear is that the reason why they're targeting the cities and the township, one township, is because they know they're not going to get the board support from the county. And to answer your question, no, it absolutely would not work without government subsidies, without taxpayer subsidies. None of these things work. And so it really, that's my opinion. But, obviously I haven't sat down, I can't do the numbers, but they are going to be receiving those funds. So the question becomes, and this has been brought up too, what happens if those funds quit? Well, I think the train is rolling on that, right or wrong, good or bad, whether it makes a difference or doesn't make a difference. I think it's rolling on it. And one of the benefits to being tied in with a larger corporation is that typically they have the lobbying power to make sure that these things keep going. And so, yeah, 40 years down the road, maybe if they do quit and they find out this whole thing's a joke, I don't know whether that's going to happen or not, but that would be the only reason they never quit doing it, right?
One thing good is it's hard to haul manure to Malaysia or China or someplace
Yeah.
else.
So we don't know.
It's gotta be here.
Yeah, so I foresee it as this. If they find out that this whole thing is a joke and they shut it down, well, then I guess the joke's on all of us. If they find out that it's a good thing and they keep it going indefinitely, well, then it's a good thing. And they have no reason to shut it down other than they lose the cows. But I guarantee you, if you put something like this up and we allow farmers to keep farming, there'll be 17,000 cows in North County feeding that thing.
We gotta be committed to it. I mean, there's so many things in this world that if you do it before the technology is really there and it's just too much of a reach, then I think it can fail. But this is a fairly proven idea, but it's just that the cost is.
If this was the first or second one being produced, I'd be a little scared. With the fact that they've got how many of them running in Denmark and they're just bringing this idea here, it builds a little more confidence in me. I mean, my own mother lives in Lewiston, so it isn't like I want something bad to happen or if I believe there was a bomb or something, and so. Okay, any other board reports? Everybody good? That was a long discussion. All right. So, on to number 7, board discussion and action items. Sheila, financial.
Okay, yes, for end of February for our accounts, we were down, we had 118,139. And then for March, it wasn't much different. It was 118,400. And I know at the last meeting, Marcia made the comment that we had a lot of money in checking and that we should shift some over to the money market, which has a higher interest rate. So I did do that. That'll be reflected in the,
And what is that interest rate?
it was almost double of what the checking was.
Is that
Bob has it.
merchants?
It's Midwest in
Midwest.
in Lewiston.
So we should ask them too, because I know a fair amount of the townships, including my brother's, sits on Fremont and St. Charles, and a bunch of these other ones they've hooked up either with Bremer merchants. So trying to keep it local, and I know a lot of that's gone in around 4%. So I don't know where
Yeah,
this one's
Bob
at.
has the statements in the folder.
This one?
Yep.
How much did we transfer in?
I put 100,000,
Perfect.
and then I figured as we spend down, I can pull it back.
Yeah. Well, and I know some of them have done some CDs, but I do know that through Bremer, they actually have some liquid funds that they're not time sensitive, but that's 4,000 for us. It's a
Yeah.
lot of money. So
Yep, so
FYI.
so if you go behind there, the first ones are the checking, and then the second set are the statements from the savings. And it shows the interest rates.
We'll dig them up after. the
Yeah,
meeting. That's
okay.
fine. But just another thought,
Mhm.
yeah, if we
Yeah.
get to that.
I don't know.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, yeah, so that's the savings right there. And I highlighted what it was for that month because the savings reports only come out
It's right there.
quarterly.
Okay.
So we're at 0.65 in the new account?
That's the savings
That's the one you transferred it into, correct?
into, yes, yes.
So we should, might be very advantageous for us to look for another account potentially.
Well, it's,
Because are
I
we
don't
gonna
know.
really need to tap into that at any time soon?
Yes, we will, before the end of the year, we will probably, if we can't spend that grant money, then we have to turn it back to the state. And I gotta, that's in the next, well, 2 agenda items.
It's better
on
than what
that.
it was, I guess.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
and
okay.
so that's what I
Money
did.
markets are typically 3.1, 3.2,
3 to 4 is what I've been seeing.
you know?
Yeah.
and maybe longer term kind of things is more, but.
Yeah,
And those you can move money in and out of on a regular basis too.
Most of the time, they'll have a minimum in, you know, that's why I'm asking how soon we're gonna spend it, because it could trigger that too.
mhm,
So,
right,
okay.
right.
Any other discussion on that? So, at least we did that.
Mhm.
So,
Yep.
okay. Any discussion on the budget itself?
Well, and then that's the budget. I have a 2024 budget. And this is different than what it was in the packet. The only difference is I put in the wrong amount for anticipated cost of audit for next year. So I increased that to 3,200.
And that's Smith Schaefer, right? Are we
No,
doing
this is Peterson, yeah. I have talked with Wanda about, and I know that's what the SWCD does with Schaefer, but because the Whitewater does not have
The
employees.
complexity.
Yeah, we don't have the complexity. It's, you know, I'm an employee of the county, and then we just get charged from my time with that, and, you know, we don't have FICA to do, we don't have, you know, I know that gets
We
complicated.
don't have a lot of inventory. or-
Right, we don't have inventory.
Still seems like it's a lot though for what it's really gone up.
It seems like it goes up $100 every year.
Yeah.
There's-
We were, I was at the Three Rivers Community Action yesterday, and it'd been 5 years, so they wanted to, we approved setting out for RUPs for new auditors, and they're gonna send them to 10, they hope they get 3 back. Auditing firms are just short-staffed,
Mhm.
taking on new
Mhm.
ones.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, so,
I do know Smith is a lot more, you know, that was actually kind of was one of my things brought up to get the SWCD or Wanda straightened out, Smith Schaefer and when Wanda saw it, she
and
said, oh my
Wanda, yeah,
gosh, you know.
and she's excellent.
Yeah, and so, but yeah, I would agree, because I know it would go up even more with Smith, but, you know, for us, I agree.
Yeah.
But it's still kind of surprising me they're at 3,200.
Well, and I put 3,200 in there because, you know, there's the cost of the audit, and then there's the cost to, for the auditor to complete our 1099s at the end of the year. And then I also included that, you know, Wabasha County has been starting to, you know, evidently when they do the audit, they also touch base with county entities. So Wabasha County has decided to add, you know, and that was one of the expenses this month was $40, which isn't much, but it, you know, so I added that in there as well, because I figure that's audit related. But I worked up a budget, proposed budget, and this is what I could do at this time. I anticipate getting a request for the county, for Winona County. They're usually, I know last year the deadline was the end of April to submit a budget request for that following year. They haven't sent that request yet. I don't know if they're just kind of behind with everything else going on in the county, but
One starts or wants their request back by the end of April.
typically, yes. So they're usually the first ones out the gate. And I thought, well, gosh, that's how many months away? Yeah, so right now, for next year, I would have the Whitewater well sealing grant and the local advisory team grant. You know, and I would anticipate that that the Whitewater could apply for another grant before the end of the year, but I don't know what that is yet. And so I'm reluctant to put something on paper without knowing.
I don't disagree.
Okay.
And that is the difficult part of having to do this 8 months in advance.
I know, it's very creative and
It's whimsical.
weird.
Whimsical.
yes.
Sheila, I was wondering, in the revenue, you've got
Mhm.
Whitewater well sealing, 14,000.
Right,
Local advisory team, 19.
right.
But then down in grant expenses,
Those
Whitewater
are,
well sealing, 19,000, and local advisory team, 4,000.
those are for expenses associated with those grants that do not tie into my time. So the Whitewater well sealing, basically that's like a 3-year grant, and I just kind of split it out and said, okay, how much will we spend each year for a well sealing cost share? So that's what that expenses is. And then the local advisory team grant, most of that is my time to assist with the meetings and contacting farmers, and the expenses that you see there are towards, we have on the schedule doing some field days, so there'll be some expenses for that, renting porta potties and mailings, things of that nature. So that's why there's a difference with the cost. So the payroll for my time, that 21,850, that's what that is. And just to FYI too, that I put at 25% of my pay, because right now that's how much Winona County has allocated of my time for the Whitewater.
So in 2024, you'll be getting 14,000 from the state for well sealing and 19,000
Yeah,
for the advisory.
and I already have that money, but I just said, well, that's the budget for incoming, that grant.
It's already in our bank.
Half of it is, yes. And once I spend it down, then I'll get 40% more. Yeah, so that's,
And like this year, what do we expect to spend on well sealing?
pardon?
This year, what do we expect to spend on well sealing? This is next year.
Right, this is next year. I hope to get a couple, at least 3 or 4 in this year,
So
because that grant.
Nothing approaching 19,000 though.
No.
I wonder if we're gonna even approach that next year.
I'm gonna make a shot at it,
Try it.
yes.
And then with the implementation of Winland coming, there's dollars there allocated for well sealing too, correct?
Right, and that I can talk a little bit at the last agenda item. I do have a copy of that budget.
Okay. And throughout the Whitewater, is there funds available for septic
Yes,
upgrades?
yes, I do have money for that. And as-
Burke was the last one.
Pardon?
Was Burke?
Tyler Burke,
Was the
yes.
last
And I
one
just
was
talked
Burke.
with him, and they anticipate like the second week of May, assuming that rain stops for a while, that they would be able to put that one in.
And who's doing that one again? Wasn't House, was it?
No. I forget.
I know we had a discussion about that. Who was doing it?
Right, because he only had one bid, and
One, and
you
I kept saying, we should at least
yeah,
get 2.
we should have 2, yes.
The reason I bring that up, we had our Human Services meeting Tuesday, big discussion on when to require septic inspection compliance for building permits and different things. And I just want to leave it alone. If there's issues, there are funds available.
Generally, yes. The state has a natural resource block grants that are available. Not every county accepts them. because they are kind of a hassle. And the state NRBG funds, or that are tied with the NRBG funds, are meant for low-income homeowners. So then each county has a threshold of what is considered low income and to be funded. So, but generally for low income, there is funding available.
You see much of that, James?
What's
In
that?
Homestead? Any of the sewer-related issues or septic systems?
I don't think they come to the
Yeah,
SWCD.
has anybody ever approached
Soil
it?
and water that much.
Yeah.
We had one water treatment system, but that's like.
The RO systems, yeah.
Next question, Altura as well. Weren't they
Yes.
searching around? Did we ever
yes.
find it? Because I found one of them 10 years ago. Did you find it?
I don't.
Oh, the lost one you're
No,
talking
the lost
about.
well. Oh,
You found one, you told
I
me.
found one of them, yeah. I found one
Yeah.
of them years ago.
The old wells.
They're still missing another one that the state says they have, and they don't know where it is.
Yeah, we found one of them. It actually happened to be literally right in an alley, and we dug down, I mean, in there, found the old tripod with the steel bent over, dug it down, and Pearson come over, sure enough, and there it was. And I've gone back in all the archive pictures, and I have some pretty old pictures from being there for so many years, just things coming about, especially the mayor and cleaning things out. And I cannot find a tower. I can't find the windmill that was on that well in any of those pictures. So I really don't know what genre that thing fit into. So we do know that it was part of an old tunnel system that was there, in an underground water well system that literally you could walk through or drive. I mean, it's some of the crazy stuff, but I can't find that thing in any pictures. But we did find that one. I believe there's one other one. I think the bigger problem is at Utica right now, trying to get that well. Are you guys, got anything to do with that?
I don't know, we've done some work for Utica in the last year or so, but
Sure.
I don't know anything about this issue you're talking about.
They need to drill a new well.
Oh, yeah,
And-
Dan Horvat told me about that.
Yeah, so, and I know there was talk a little bit about the MPCA's having them shut down one well until the other one was going, and I'm just hoping that was a complete fallacy. I said, no, you can't do that. So,
Are you talking about Altura or?
no, Utica.
Okay.
Utica. Yeah, so they're looking at doing that and having property.
Too many nitrates, is that the issue?
Yeah, so they're gonna be doing that one too, owning property in that town too. It all affects you, so be interesting to see what happens. But did Altura, what's the deal with their wells?
Oh, they're getting their well sealed. This is well number one.
Yep.
And so the county was able to get the grant for
Mhm.
that. And so working with Dan, and I know
I've
Dan,
seen that well.
yep. And so,
If you clean it out first, you can't, man, we gotta set a drill.
yeah, it was supposed to have been sealed in the late 1970s. But then, as it turns out, there was never any record of purchasing any grout, or, so it was just kind of spurious. Was it done, or did somebody say it got done?
Well, they
And
probably shoved a rag in the hole. and
that's
Couple
what
bags.
we
and
don't
got it
know.
wet.
Yeah,
That's
so,
what we found at that other one.
yeah, so that's going to be potentially kind of tricky.
Yep.
And so I guess Mark can relate what
Well,
needs to be done
yeah,
there.
I just gave him a proposal, we don't know what's down there, so we're gonna set a drill rig up over it, drill it all out, measure the well, and then seal it up.
Yeah.
I think you told us at our last meeting, what's the average well sealing cost?
Well,
I mean, just a real well,
yeah,
simple.
like $2,500, $3,000.
Okay.
Weren't those grants they were giving out a while back, weren't they up to 10,000 for some of those? I know initially when we got the grant to seal that one, I think it was up to like 10,000. Or am I way off on that?
Well, well, Fillmore SWCD has a regional one, and I'm not sure if they're done with it yet, but it was for helping people seal wells. That was, we did one in Winona County, because the other grant that we had with the county, for well drilling, so we were able to use that grant to cost share well drilling, and then the old well was sealed through SWCD, and that's the one that Amanda worked on. And so we were able to get this homeowner the 2 grants, but then that other grant also had cost share for reverse osmosis systems, and that just ended. And now Caitlin Meyer at Olmsted is trying to find a follow-up for that grant. It was a pilot just to see how it works in the 6 counties, and it went very well. And so now we'd like to, now that we've shown that there's a need, if there's any other funding sources to continue that would be good.
It's gonna replace old wells for low-income people, is that what it's for?
It's scored based on income as well as location or vulnerability. So there were a couple different factors, and
But it's not to replace it, it's just to seal it.
well, we
Or
had
you
to
did?
drill that for that grant, but then we used another grant to seal the old
To
one.
seal the old, okay,
Yeah.
I get you. Yep.
Yeah, I knew this, though, because Olmsted's done some well sealing anyway, time
Yeah.
to time, not a lot.
Well, I guess we're technically still on the budget here.
Yeah.
I feel like the
So,
meeting should be done.
In the event that I get a request to submit this before the June meeting, this is what I will submit.
Okay. Any other discussion on the budget? I look at it this way, I break things down, the amount of administrative cost and the amount of boots on the ground money. So we're at
Right.
30,000 and 23,000. So what's the ratio to that? 60/40 roughly? Which, believe it or not, in government is not that bad of a ratio.
Oh, really?
Because I've
Good
seen
to
it
know.
worse. A lot worse. So it's never good. You'd like to see 90/10.
Sure.
But I've seen 90/10 the other way. So it is crazy, but the more efficient we are, the better off we're going to be.
And this could certainly fill in a little bit more if I apply for another grant and get funded, so then that'll just be added. But anyway.
Good. Any other discussion on the budget? Thank you for taking a stab. It's literally just throwing darts at a dartboard. It's what we gotta
I
do
hate
this.
doing the budget. I just,
Mindful. Okay, move on to,
We need
well, we need a motion on that.
Yes.
So we need a motion to.
Approve the financial update and budget.
Second.
All right, motion made by Bob, second by Mark, to approve the financial proposed to 2024 budget. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Line item B, farm business. All right, you're up, Tom.
okay, yes. And so this is Tom Anderson, and he and Ryan Steele, as you recall, for the 319 nitrogen reduction grant that we had that finished up at the end of last year, we had some remaining funds that I was intending to use for nitrogen management education. And so I asked, so that's how we made the connection. We provided $30,000 to the Farm Business Management to provide scholarships for farmers. And I will let Tom take it from here.
Thank you so much, appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Kind of got this, I guess, hopefully you.
We can turn.
Yeah.
We got a bit back.
So, yeah, some of you have known Lynn and Bob for a long time. I started out my career in Plainview teaching high school, and Bob was an FFA officer of mine. That was 2-3 years ago, something like that, maybe 5,
Yeah,
or more.
maybe 6.
Maybe 6. So know him well. I actually work with his wife quite a bit at my office in Forsyth Bank in Plainview. Very interesting for me to sit and listen to your discussion on the Nature's Energy project, as I work with probably the majority of those dairies that are actively involved with that, so I get a little bit of the other side and realize that one of the things that's going to be incurred by all of the dairy farmers that work with that is they need to cover their basins. So there's going to be a floating basin cover, which is part of the issue the farmers have had, and they originally started out with about 3 or 4 dairies, and got some pushback on some of that. partly because of the investment that they need to make. You know, putting a floating cover on a basin and all those kinds of things are kind of costly too.
One thing with that, Tom, and this is talking with a lot of locals that have reached out to myself or we work with already. The thing that I've heavily encouraged, and maybe you can, you know, give me your opinion, but the number one thing I said is like, can you ask them for some sort of reclamation fund, some sort of bond, that if this thing goes south and you don't have your investment cost for the covering of these pits, the additional pits, whatever that is, there's a bond or an insurance policy put into play that pays you back for your cost. So that, because what I don't want to see is 5, 6, 10 dairies go under because of this. And so I heavily stress that to these farms.
Good point, very good point, I think. Back last fall, actually, I happened to go into a Twins game with a college buddy of mine I hadn't seen in 40 years. And he sat down next to me, he started talking about this Nature's Energy project he was working on, and he happens to be from North Branch, an agronomist from up there. And I said, what on earth are you doing down here? You know, and one of the things I said to him is, you need to sharpen the pencil a little bit on the dairy farmer side of it. And they've done some of that, but I like your point in that. There needs to be some compensation. Realizing that when you talk about the economic engine that a dairy farm provides, it is tremendous. A number of years ago, it was $17,000 of economic impact to a community on a per cow basis. That was probably
It's a staggering number.
10 years ago. So I would guess we're well into the mid $20,000 of today's numbers. So, you know, we are very fortunate, I think, in southeast Minnesota to have dairy and livestock. And to your comment earlier, Josh, go out western Minnesota and try and make sure you go with a full tank of gas, because you may not make it to the next town that doesn't have a gas station. You know, I was out there a few years ago and I go, dang, I should have filled up with gas, because now I am trying to find a gas station in this town of 500 people or something. There's nothing, you know, it's kind of scary.
Spend a lot of time out there, and it is a difference.
It's a big difference between western Minnesota and what we have here. So anyway, also one last point on that, and I'll move on. I don't know if you're aware that Shell Oil Company bought that, Nature's Energy. So you talk about deep pockets, there's probably a couple of deeper pockets there. So farm business management, first of all, I want to thank you for the grant that you gave the farms that we work with. We work with a lot of farms in southeast Minnesota, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with the farm business management program. We have been around for 70 years, we're celebrating our 70th year, so it's not something that's new to the state of Minnesota. Back many years ago, we were an organization that was housed some out of high schools. There was a veterans program as the wars were finished off and those kinds of things. And it became kind of a two-segment piece, originally kind of called adult farm business management. And in the last number of years, it was just converted to farm business management. There's not a veterans piece per se, although there's advantages to veterans to be in the program. So anyway, we also celebrated the 70 years. There's 6 different colleges across the state that house farm business management, with a faculty of about 85, give or take, of us across the entire state. Obviously, more in the southern half of the state than there is in the northern half of the state. Let's see. Are we working here or are we not working? Let's see what we got here. Why this doesn't work? Oh, come on. What I'm trying to do here. Should be working. It's not want to go on to my next movie. Try something else here once.
There we go.
So the data that you'll see is, I've handed out a book to you. Every year we put together a book like that. That is statewide data, but the majority of that's coming from the southern half of the state. We also have an electronic copy if you'd like to have a copy of that. So the data that's in here is actually from 1,476 farms in southeast, south central, southwest, and western central regions of Minnesota. And you see the number of faculty that's involved with each of those, putting that data together.
So where would Jack have fallen into? Is he in Riverland or South Central?
Jack LaBalla?
LaBalla, yeah.
He was with Riverland.
He was Riverland, and then what's his name? Over
Ryan
Spring Valley?
Steele. Dan Miller.
Dan Miller.
He retired.
Yeah. Oh, he did.
In the
Okay.
beginning of the first of this year. In fact, it's an open position for us right now.
But he was Riverland or
Yeah,
South?
he's
was
in Riverland, yeah. So
okay.
there's 9 of us at Riverland. Actually 8, we're hiring 2 positions right now, one there and one in Plainview. So we're looking to grow our presence. Just kind of, what we do, just so you have an idea, we work with farms throughout the year, putting financial data, production data together. It then is stored at the University of Minnesota, the Center for Farm Financial Management, if you're familiar with that. It's probably one of, well, the database that we have in Minnesota is the largest agricultural production database in the world. We go back, it's been dated back to where we began. So you can go in and I'll give you the website, you can go in and query the variety of different things. So as we work with farms, at the end of the year, we work diligently to get balance sheets and cash flows and cost analysis, all those kinds of things done, and that's what you see in the book. If you look in the book, you'll see the front half is called the whole farm. So that's kind of looking at how did farms do. So in other words, you can look at types of things like gross farm income, net farm income, those kinds of things. Then you go back to the other pages and you'll see it broke out by enterprise. So there's corn enterprise, soybeans enterprise, owned by and rented land, livestock enterprises. Then we divide each of those into 4 different categories. One of them is the average of all the farms that are enrolled in that. Then we have a low return, a mid return, and a high return, based on the net return to that particular enterprise. So you can, I'll show you some of that data so you can see what was the difference between the higher return farms and the lower return farms as far as yields and those kinds of things. So that's kind of the premise that we go under. So last year the net farm income was up to a little over $1 million and $967,000.
Interesting number.
Yeah. Cash operating expenses also up from $790,000 to $884,000 last year. Look at the net cash then, 177 to 192, so that also is up about 8%. And if you look at the median farm income, up from 176 to 177, relatively modest as far as net farm. Now, just so you understand what net farm is. Net farm is taking your cash income minus the cash expenses. We then make the adjustments for inventory. So somebody does a lot of prepay in December. They got inventory of seed, fertilizer, chemicals, whatever, all that is washed out. And then we also make the depreciation adjustment as well. And that's how we come up with the net farm income. If you are some other businesses, you might be more familiar with the term EBITDA, earnings before income tax, depreciation, amortization. In agriculture, typically this is the net farm income. And so if you've been reading any of that lately, it just came out here in the last couple of 3 weeks, what happened in last year. So that's the number that we always kind of refer to as the comparable number from year to year and farm to farm. Look at the actual number of farms and the actual sizes. So in our database, you can see there's a lot less farms, and these are years 18, 19, 21, all the way through. So each column is a different year. You can see those that are earning less than 100,000, and the number of farms that are earning over $1 million. And that number just continues to increase over the year. Relatively stable to last year, but in the last couple of years, it's gone up quite a bit. This chart is showing the gross cash farm income and total cash expenses. The yellow column being the cash income, and the blue column being those expenses. So the thing is to focus on here is not so much whether it is yellow or blue or orange or blue, but more the space in the difference between them.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the income, here's the expense, here's the income, here's the expense. How does that compare, giving you that at the end?
That just follows cash and milk price right there. Cash price of corn, or cash,
Yeah,
commodity
it is.
price and milk
Commodity
price. I mean,
price.
that just,
Yep.
that's exactly the curve in the
Exactly
last
the-
10 years.
Yeah, it is
Yeah,
exactly.
so it's really the marginal difference to how they were able to hang on during the low points.
Yep, exactly. So it kind of gives you what has happened. And of course, there's been significant increases in commodity prices the last 2 or 3 years here. And so crop producers have typically done pretty well. Getting back to net farm income then, in a median manner, you can see from 15 to 19, they were pretty
Tough
minimal.
years. They were hard years.
Probably those of you involved with this kind of know what that is. And the last 3 years, of course, that median net farm income with commodity prices has been significantly different. Look at the net farm income then, again, kind of by average and low return and high return. So it kind of tells you a little bit that, on an average, farms did better this year than they had in the previous years. However, you look at the end, maybe the same is true, but those in the low return, in other words, the lowest net return to their operation, kind of broke even, right? So the low return farms are still challenged out there. And a lot of that, of course, is size and scale as well. But then you move those high return farms and look what's happened to that net farm income. So what does it talk about? What's the reason for that? What do you think? What's going to make the difference between something in a low return versus a high return farm?
More acreage and lower, bought the acreage at lower prices than the.
Certainly a piece of it.
There's a lot of factors.
There's a lot of
A lot of
factors.
factors.
Yeah,
There's
that
a lot of
anything to do
factors.
with it?
But I'll tell you what, if you're consistent, you talk about where we are, if you're consistent at 150 bushels of corn a year and never get better,
You're going backwards.
you're not progressing very fast, are you? You know, so you'll see some corn yields in you. It's been kind of interesting in where we are. So the rate of return on farm assets, this is like putting your assets into the bank, and what would the bank have to pay you to get that kind of return? You look back here, in early years, it wasn't all that great, 18, 17, 15. You know, they weren't doing all well. Look what's happened in 19, 20, 21, 22. The last 3 years, we've got about 7 to 11, 10 to 11% return on our investment. And again, definitely related to the commodity prices, right? And I'll tell you, it's definitely related to southeast Minnesota and its ability to grow crops.
We've been very blessed right here.
We have been very blessed
Compared to-
in southeast
We
Minnesota.
talked to our Nebraska boys and Dakota boys, and I mean, them guys are, it's been horrible.
Well, you look back a few years when we had preventative plant.
Well, it actually
Right.
started in 12 and 13, but it progressed all the way in 14 because it progressed across the states to the Dakotas
Right.
in those 3 years. We
Yep.
had 3 segments here.
But we haven't, you know, when we think of the preventative plant years, we didn't really have much of that here. Yeah, in western part of the state, and they
That's
have
the
a lot
part
of
we,
preventative.
a lot of it.
A lot of preventative plant, you know. And, you know, I appreciate what benefits they were able to get, but an insurance premium does not do the same thing, right?
Not like growing a crop.
Our dairies out there that year, that's before they changed the law for the forage law, where you couldn't take forage after November 1st, you remember that? And then now they changed that. We literally were buying out warehouses of a particular variety of things in the whole country. Because there was nothing left to plant, because all the prevent plant and what guys were putting in and for different forage crops to try to pull after November 1st, you couldn't find anything. So they were, you could almost charge whatever you wanted. And so we were trying to find these at reasonable rates, and we couldn't do it because people were just gouging.
Sure,
I
yeah.
mean, it was crazy times in 12 and 13 with all
Oh,
that.
two crazy times. Yep, yep. This is kind of an interesting piece too, as we look at what's coming into the family living from non-farm sources. In other words, spouses living in town and that kind of thing. You know, we're in the last few years here, we're over $40,000 of non-farm income, as opposed to back here we were 25, even 30. It's well, something we look back beyond the 13, and it was, you know, in the tens and below that. So we've seen a big shift to that way. In addition to income, of course, there's a lot of the benefits that are coming to farms, health insurance, and all those kinds of things. So relatively stable, but certainly a big part of farm income. This is kind of an interesting piece. You know, you look at what was spent in the community, and you guys are really focused on developing community in-house. You know, what economic engines do we have? Well, look at this number. The average farm last year spent $1,281,000.
It's the driving force behind it. It's crazy.
It's incredible. It's incredible. And I'll tell you that if we were to do just, you know, very much southeast, this is the southern half. If we did a southeast in Minnesota, it's even going to be a lot more than that. You know, just because of what we have here and the livestock that's.
Livestock is by far a greater generator than what cash croppers are.
Cash croppers oftentimes will bypass your immediate.
Local means.
The local means, whether it's the seed, the fertilizer, the whatever, they bypass that, the storage, and either they store it themselves and it goes to the riverboat terminal, or it just bypasses that. And I'm not downgrading that at all, but that's a difference as opposed to livestock, who has the vet, they have a nutritionist, they have a repair piece, they have the equipment dealership, they have, list goes on and on and on, you know. And when I work with farms, I'm privileged to work with just about 100% dairy farms. But you look at the numbers of checks that are written by a dairy farm compared to the number of checks written by a
Thanks
crop
about
farm.
puke.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big number. It's a big number. As well as the employment piece of it, you know. My average dairy farm is now over 300 cows. And I work with them up to about 1,100. The number of employees on those farms, I think of the 65 farms I work with, maybe all but 3 have employees.
Well, and you even look at the driver as you move western Minnesota. We'll take Riverview now. Do I think Riverview needs all these 10,000 cow dairies? It is what it is. But we work with a lot of the cash croppers around it.
Mm-hmm.
And the driver that is to those cash croppers to have a guaranteed income and a third rotation, alfalfa, they're planting alfalfa again for the first time in years and years and years, cutting their costs, cutting their seed bills by not having to, buy, 8-way stack corns, being able to get all the manure back on the ground, not having to buy so much, purchase the driver and the competition around those dairies, the boom that happens around there just on the cash croppers and how it's changed the soil when we're not just single monoculture all the time. And
Yeah, great rotation.
oh my gosh,
You know,
it's just, those guys just love it.
Yeah.
So it's wonderful.
It's unfortunate they have to be 10,000 cow units and not maybe
Yeah,
10,000 cow units.
1,000 cow units,
Yeah.
but you're not gonna stop it, and that's the problem.
And we're seeing that here. I started in this job in I started high school in 1981 and started this in 98. And I look at my dairies and how they have grown in size. It's just incredible. Most of them that are still dairying have doubled or more in size, oftentimes tripled from what they were. And it is an economic piece for them to survive as well. But dairying is a tough gig. There's no doubt about it. Anyway, this is the amount of money. You start to look at that $1.2 million that's spent in the community. That's a lot of money. Look at the net worth change. Sorry, some of this is going off the screen over there. Look at the change in net worth. And again, this is by color code. So your top one is the change in equity by the high return farms, and then you got the low and the average. So average and middle and low return. So as you look at the economic piece of these dairies that are the low return, they didn't change much, did they? So you have to look at those who had a modest return, yeah, and they gained, $300,000. Those who had a better return, making into the high return, they're up in that $900,000 category. So it's big change. Depends on where you're at. Let's talk a little bit about corn yields in southeast Minnesota. Again, the bottom line is the average line. The green line would be the high return. So this year you saw the high returns at about 230 bushel average, as the average return is about 213. You see they kind of run a parallel, a little bit wider parallel since 17, 18. Ran pretty close back here. So wider division. And 230 bushel, not a bad yield. Not a bad yield.
Not for southeast Minnesota.
No. And then if you look at the United States chart, and of course, they don't have the yields total. They're at 173, but most importantly, look at the trajectory that's happened. This down in the bottom is 1993, I think it is. Sorry about the light in here. So you can see what's happening in corn yields over that period of time, even on the national level.
Something very interesting, the 11 to 13, that's that was a big prevent plants here in the upper Midwest. Does it factor in the acres that weren't planted for prevent? Is that what we're seeing there? Taking them as a total as a whole, if we take them out, so that would drop the average,
Right.
right?
Yep.
And that falls right in that prevent
In
plant.
that prevent plant, yep.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder if they don't take them out.
Yeah, but it's just, you look at the overall trajectory, it's just continuous growth, right? Which is really interesting data. Look at the cost of producing a bushel of corn before labor and management charge. And we're about $4.53 this year. On the high return, and the average return is about $3.77. So you think about that, again, looking at that yield of 230 bushels versus, 213, that's really what's driving this. And look at the difference in this gap between them. You gain more space, right? It's because there's more price and there's more yield. And so you start looking at this, and if a fellow starts to sell corn at $6.50, making $2 a bushel, right? Can make some money and pay some debt. Of course, that has to compensate for some of the land costs that we have around here in southeast Minnesota. You guys are all familiar with what that land cost is and what's happened to it. You know, 10.5 will hardly touch anything anymore. And you know, 13.5 is probably more common than what we would like to see. Even with the interest rates the way they are currently, still have it moving. Let's talk a little bit about soybean yields. And again, we have the red line being the low return, the average being in the middle, the yellow dots, and then the high return being up on top. And again, you look at the high return being 66.5 bushel to an acre, as opposed to the middle of 59 and the low return 52. You see, there's always that margin, you know? There's always that margin. And look what happened here. We widened the margin. We widened the margin. Interesting data, isn't it?
Well, I look at that 2021 and I'm just rolling through my head what and why. And that's cumulative for Minnesota or the southern part of the state?
This is from the southern, like from
I-94 south. Well, I do know in 2021, actually in that St. Cloud 29 corridor north, they had a heavy frost come through and knocked out a lot of test weight in corn and beans.
Yeah.
And there was a spike, and so if they're accumulating, especially in the organic industry and things like that, they really got hit hard, and they typically are going to fall in the lower yield category. And I wonder if that isn't the reflection why we saw
It could well be.
such a high side, the highest side and the lowest side, or one of the lowest sides. Does that make sense? And I think that's probably cumulative to that frost that came through, because that went all the way through into Wisconsin.
Right. So just a word too, if you go on, and I'll give you the website, you can go on and query this and do actually down to the county level, if there's enough farms in the county so that you can't say, I know, this is Joe's farm. You can't do that.
Look to the south, did
You
really
can do
well.
the southeast corner if you wanted to.
Bet your steak dinner, that's why.
Yeah, sure, yeah, right. And again, you know, we're blessed in southeast Minnesota, right? We have the hills and all. I would dare to venture that if you move west of I-90, you're going to see some lakes and some ducks out in the middle of fields, you know? Whereas here, rolling hills provide much better drainage and getting into fields sooner, and obviously our yields are good. Again, just looking at the soybean yields, come up the same kind of trajectory. You know, we came up about, this is, of course, new data isn't out yet, 49.5 bushel in 21, but been about 49, 50 bushel. Again, as the trajectory has happened over time. So yields continue to improve. You know, back when I first started teaching in the 80s, the whole thing was, hey, you know what? There's no more land, and we're not going to be able to feed the world, and because our yields just aren't good enough. Well, what's happened since the 80s? You know, and I don't care if you're talking corn or beans or wheat or milk or whatever. It's been a big change all the way through. Soybeans return per acre. Look at this. Again, the average farm, $238. The high return farm, $426 in net return. Based on yields, based on price. Let's talk just briefly about dairy, because that's been kind of a topic here this morning, and really a piece here in southeast Minnesota that's interesting. So because it's our 70s, I decided I'm going to go back and look at a book, the oldest one that I could find. This came from 1954. In the last 15 years, the American farmer has been able to increase production by 38% without increasing the total number of cultivated areas. This increase in production is due to agricultural technology and education. Artificial breeding of dairy cattle has made rapid strides during this period of time. Oops, sorry. This program is often referred to as one of the fastest growing industries in America, second only to television.
Wow.
It kind of puts perspective. You know, some of you guys aren't old enough to remember the 50s, but I remember, I was born in 56, so I remember having the black and white TV that was console about this big, you know, it was amazing what happened there. So
I gotta call bias to the guy that wrote it, Minnesota Valley Breeders.
Yeah.
He's trying to church it up a little.
Yeah, it came from there. I have more slides on it with today, but talking more about that whole time frame and what's happened since then. So I went back and said, you know, I'm just going to do a little bit of comparing here between 1964, that's the oldest actual data I could find, and 2022. So total farm receipts was $28,000. Total farm receipts, all sales. This year, $948,000. Amazing, isn't it? The dairy farm size was 26.7 cows per farm. Today in our database, it's 273 cows. Milk per cow at that time was 10.7. Today it's 25.5 almost. Butterfat was 387 pounds per cow per year. Today, butterfat and protein together is about 1854. The butterfat piece of that's going to be about 1,100 pounds. So we've gone from about 387 to 1,100 pounds of fat only. The net return per cow was 178, and today 686.
Two things on that board. That is disproportionate, 178 to
Isn't it?
686.
Well,
Well, take it, yeah.
Yeah.
It's horribly disproportionate.
Isn't it?
What it shows is it takes a lot more cattle to operate that farm because the revenue isn't there like it used to be.
Right.
The other thing that's off is the size. If it wasn't for all our organic herds, and I've helped hundreds of them in this state transition to organic, I don't care what you are, that number would be significantly higher because you can't cash flow a small organic or dairy herd today like you used to be able to. And right there is the proof as the bottom number.
Interesting you bring that up. I'll talk about the organic in just a
Oh,
second.
sorry, I jumped ahead.
Yep, no, no, it's interesting how you
Yeah.
pick that up. And I my exact same feelings. You know,
Yeah.
you look at the going to this and getting that. You know, it's crazy.
You pull those organic herds out, that 273 would be significantly higher.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I have to go back and look and see if I eliminated organics or not. I can't recall.
Okay.
I don't recall
That'd
what
be
I did
interesting.
then. But since you bring up organics, if you look at the production between organics and the conventional, organic herds average 15,000 pounds versus 25. The price received was 30. Price received was 24.24. Net return per cow, 616, 686.
Crazy.
So I went back and actually averaged the last 3 years, the net return per cow compared organic to non. How much difference do you suppose we had on a per cow basis? $6 per cow. $6. Pretty interesting data.
I would argue back in the mid-2000s, you know, when those numbers were driving, because back then they were getting 30 and we were, you know, 12 and 13. It was very profitable to get into organics, and now that has gotten closer.
Yeah, organics has had a lot of flooding the market situation. Outpricing themselves probably. The moms of the world who are going to buy a jug of milk and going to pay 8, I'm going to pay 4. Those kinds of things that have affected that. Look at the fat and protein per cow, and of course that is really what's driving the dairy market today is to ship solids rather than liquid. Just to give you a quick example, I compared 28 dairy herds for the first 9 months of last year. My goal was to say, because the shipping cost of milk is so dramatically different between one processor and another, I wanted to see really what are we getting with comparison of milk price after you kind of wash out the shipping costs. I had, in those 9 months of production, I had 2 herds I looked, other 28, I looked at 2 of them. It was kind of dramatic. Both between 17 and 18 million pounds of milk were being shipped in those 9 months. One paid $135,000 to get his milk shipped. The other one paid $1,112. $135,000 compared to $1,112. At the end of the day, when I looked at the net price of milk afterwards, it's like 18 cents difference.
Net basically.
Net basis. Yep. So when dairy farmers down here and they compare to Farmer Joe and Farmer Pete and whoever inside the milk price, you can't do it. You can't do it. It has absolutely no relativity to it to compare it anymore.
But what's crazy is you try to explain this to people in the countryside, and it's just they have this fictitious thing that, you know, organics, just you need to do organic, you need to do this, or you need to do that, and they don't understand the market isn't there. You can't do it, and it doesn't.
The disadvantage of organic has 2, and of course they're making those guidelines look tighter now than what they were before.
It's getting way worse.
But it's the process to go into it. So if I'm going to convert to this, I got 3 years of crop preparation of being organic before I get a price.
You need a good banker or a fat wallet. That's the truth.
And there's some that can make it, and there are a few, and there's some really good ones. No, nothing saying that, but the challenge is good. I heard yesterday at a team meeting I had that there are now restrictions. If I have a heifer, I have to have that heifer organic from day one. She can no longer transition.
And it used to be a 1-year transition.
Yeah.
3 year on feed, 1 year on the cow.
Yep. But I can't even do a heifer anymore. Can't transition it from a conventional. She has to. If she's a cow, I can transition, but I can't transition the heifer. Interesting stuff. Again, look at the feed costs. The costs obviously a little bit higher on the organic side than others. Direct cost 20 versus 17. Direct and overhead 25 versus 19. Pounds of milk per full-time equivalent person. The definition of that is 3,000 hours is a full-time equivalent. About 1 million pounds of milk versus 1,000,009. So pretty substantially different on that. You look at the overall production on conventional herds and what's happened since 2013, gone from about 23,000 pounds to 25,500. This is not an energy corrected milk. This is just straight out milk, okay, conventional milk. This is the southern Minnesota data. If I take just southeast Minnesota, look at the difference. We're 27.8 compared to the state average of 25.5. We're 27.8, significantly more on a per cow basis. You think we're out in a good dairy part of the world? We are.
We know how to do it.
We know how to do it. Energy corrected milk, it's 28.4. Everybody familiar with that term, energy corrected? No. Okay, so energy corrected milk, let me kind of compare it to corn. So I have to go out and harvest corn, and I harvest it at 30 bushel or 30% moisture. Joe over here is harvesting at 20%. I get 180, or say 230 bushels, and he gets 210 bushels. Are they comparable? No, we convert everything back to dry corn basis, right? Then we can compare corn. So what we're doing here is getting it all back to a common base of 3.5 and 3.1% fat and protein. So this is a comparable number from one to another. So when we look at energy corrected milk and how many pounds of solids is a cow producing per cow per day. Solids meaning fat and protein. So if the cow is producing 100 pounds of milk a day and she's at 4% fat, that's 4 pounds of fat. She's at 3% protein, that'd be 3 pounds of protein. 4 and 3 is 7. That should gain 7 pounds.
So the difference in the type, a Holstein versus a Jersey or
Yeah.
Bred Swiss is going to have different components.
Yeah, but it's-
so that's the way to make them all on the same level of field.
Right. So that when you compare corn yields, one guy is wet corn, dry corn, you can't compare that, right? And this is just something that's been really,
The way to do it.
yep, way to kind of do that. 3X versus 2X herds. I spent a lot of time here, but look at the pounds of milk difference. 2X, not organic herds, just conventional 2X herds. 24,000 versus almost 28,000 pounds of milk. You look at the price, a little bit of difference, 40 cents give or take. Look at the net return. Yeah.
What's 3X versus 2?
So milking 3 times a cow, milking the cows 3 times a day versus 2 times a day. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yep. Good
You
question.
see an influential factor of robots on the 3X?
Yeah, now I have a couple things in here on that too.
Okay.
I've done robot work since 2007 when they first came out, and I've done cash flow planning all over the country, actually in the robotic world. So.
Oh, another thing with the 3 times a day versus 2 times, if you got really high production, I don't know if you can really do 2 times. I mean, they're squirting out milk and
Yeah.
whatever makes
Yeah, coming in late.
problems in the free stalls and
Yeah.
whatnot. And well, we went from 2 times to 3 times, but we've sold our cows like 4 years ago now. But we had some mastitis, I would say maybe 12, 14 cases a year. But when we went to 3 times, when they only had 2 treatable cases, milking 100 cows, 100 pounds a day for a year, and my wife was really happy about that.
Yeah, right. And of course, that cell count is so significant today because it's a matter of how long that shelf life is for that product. Also a matter of cheese yield when you're making cheese. So the cell count, somatic cell count is called, it's actually flakes within the udder that if you take a strip out, if you're not familiar with it, it looks a little bit chunky, a little bit like cottage cheese when you're running cottage cheese. So it's an infection within the udder. We try and reduce that. We measure that in thousands and in 100,000s. And so today, across the state, we're probably 200,000 either side of that. Back about 4 or 5 years ago, we were 400 plus. 1,000, and so the quality of milk has greatly improved in the last half a dozen years in southeast
I
Minnesota.
think a lot of that's ration based, so, because we kind of come off the turn and burn Land O'Lakes diets out of the 90s and really push,
There's
push,
a lot of
push.
things that are rational.
And now we're getting back to the more high forage diets. I see, they're understanding the importance of forage again.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. But it used to be, we didn't think we could get high producing cows and high components either,
Mhm.
and now we're just blowing that out of the water.
and genetics as well.
Genetics has been a big piece. Nutrition has been an enormous piece. Back when I started this job, I'd go to a farm and they say, well, how many DAs, displaced abomasum surgeries, did you cut today or this week? And it was, well, I only cut 2 this week. And that's what if you understand the rumen is 4 compartments and it gets twisted. It's like a knot in a balloon, right? And so then you have to go and unknot that balloon. That was very common, very common. Today, if somebody cuts out of 1,000 cow herd, they might 4 or 5 a year.
A lot of that was a lack of ADF or a lack of beneficial fiber. It was a hot diet, a hot scenario. And they've learned since that ADF is a very important number to maintain that rumen mat, and we've eliminated a lot of those DAs.
Yeah, which is reduces a lot of vet costs too. So, a little bit to your question on robotic. The first column is robotic, the second column is 2X hertz, and then 3X hertz. So you see the energy corrected milk flow, 29,000 on robotics, 26 on 2X, and 30,000. So very close to the 3X hertz. And they should be, because we typically milk them about 2.8 times per cow per day. So we're pretty close. Look at the feed costs, a little bit higher there, but we're doing some things on the robotic world that's changing that. With
The enticement factor to get them to win.
But now we're feeding meal instead of pellets on a lot of them, and so we're reducing that cost to about anywhere from 55 to 75 cents a head a day. So that's going to get that number back. Look at the vet costs. This is kind of interesting. Breeding costs, pretty stable all-way costs. So just some really interesting things. The labor costs, of course, robotic, did it actually save some labor? Compare, yes it did, and it better, right? It's got to make that thing, the whole thing work. Cost of production, 2168, 2273, 2137. So about 30 cents difference so far. But again, realize a lot of that is in the depreciation of buying that machine. Really interesting. I think robotics, in my mind, is something that's going to happen. It's happened in every other industry. What makes you think that's not going to happen in the dairy industry?
Well, touch on your bottom line, pounds of milk per employee.
Yeah, that 2.6 versus 1.7, 1.8.
They work a lot better now, because Don Borchaks and I went to tour one by Lewiston way there, and man, it found the udder and put the inflations on to milk, and we hardly even noticed it, whereas like 5 years ago, they'd be fishing around. It takes so much time, but I think they can probably put the milkers on as fast as people operating it now, I'd say.
Yeah. Now we typically look, we call it box time if you're in a DLL or Lele system. It's box time. How long is the cow actually in the box being milked? Typically 6 1/4, 6.5 minutes, and that technology has gotten better and better and better. I met one time with Alexander Vanderlele, who was the owner of the Lele system, one of them, and I asked him, I said, well, he's a tall Dutch guy, I said, well, Alexander, when do you think we're going to get more efficiency in this robot and cut off 10 or 15 seconds, or whatever? And he looked at me in his Dutch accent and said, oh, Tom, you ask such crazy things. and it wasn't 6 months to make him out the next phase. He cut 15 seconds off, So that industry is incredible, and it's really fun to watch and be a part of. Let's just jump over to beef cow situation a little bit. I know I'm extending my time here. That's been a challenge here for the last few years. Cow calf. We had a good year back here in 14, but just the cow calf has been a challenge. So this is, we made $6 back here, but not very much on a per cow
I
basis.
see that maybe trending a little better here recently.
We've had some better prices this last year, and certainly some calves you're going to see. I think as you get into this this year, you're going to see some bump just because of those beef prices. But remember,
23 projecting to be better.
yeah, but remember that best cure for high prices is usually high prices.
Exactly.
So something to think about that what might happen, but the trend has not been all that great. Just touch base on the hog side of it. The bottom side is the price received carcass weight. The middle is a live weight, and then the top is a net return per hundredweight. So you get basically the trajectory. They had a pretty decent year the last 2-3 years, but it's a challenge today. The prices have dropped off in some of those hogs. Some, and of course, you got a high-priced corn going into them. So
Just figure out how to take a hog and make all bacon out of it, we'd be happy.
yeah. I have a farm up by Faribault that I work with that kind of got pulled into work with. It's a 2-generation, actually 3 generations, of grandparents and their son, and they have 2 grandsons coming in. And they, I don't know, 80, 100,000 hogs a year that they sell, something like that. Have about 14 different growers. And I was there on, I guess it was Friday. And they said, well, we have a little bit of an issue. I said, well, what's that? And he said, well, one of our growers, the backup battery failed on the hog building. They hadn't checked the backup battery.
Doesn't take long.
And they were home, 2,000 hogs, nearly to market weight, $325,000 worth of loss of market hogs, just because the backup battery didn't perform. So, trying to figure that out. So in here, this is the site. If you were to go to FinBin, I can get this. Oops. And just do it this way. This is what it would look like. So if you were to go into FinBin, let me just go back there once. And you were to select, you go to this website, finbin.umn.edu. You can go to whole farm, you go to crop and livestock, and get different kinds of reports. So if you want to do a crop one, so I'm going to show you here. I clicked on that one, and I just, so this is the kind of thing that you can get and compare. So this is 19, 20, 21, 22, then an average. So 4,500 farms in here plus. Again, I apologize for coming off the screen, but you can kind of see what the overall yield is and dollars and that kind of thing. So you can compare using that database to get that information. And you can pick it by the whole state. You can pick it by several states are now a part of the University of Minnesota database. And so you can pick by state or region of the state, whatever you want to have. So that's kind of the whole crux of what we have as the data that we provide to the farms that we work with, and say they get what's called each farm we work with gets a ranking report. Kind of looks like, you know, when your kids are growing up and they're in the 90 percentile, they're probably, for height, they're probably tall. We do the same thing for all the different features as to are they tall, are they short, and those are either high cost, or middle cost, or low cost. So the data that we provide the farms is benchmarking that they can do against themselves, that they can do against a region or a state level, and see areas that they can improve. I think that's all I have, unless there's other questions. Great data, great information.
So the grant funds we provided,
The grant funds went to help pay for some of the enrollment that the farms had to be enrolled in our program.
yeah,
And so they, the requirements were that they weren't the entire Whitewater watershed. You had a restricted area within Whitewater watershed that those, and so those filed applications, and we notified those that were eligible because of the geographic location.
so this fell under the nitrogen reduction grant.
Yes.
Is that,
Right.
was there education targeted towards,
There is some of that,
And
right. And so if you were to go
reduction?
into this thing too, we call it special sorts. So if I wanted to special sort just robotics, I could do that. If I want to special sort nitrogen applications, I can do some of that.
okay,
So that's the reason that you can target some of that. One of the things that we are working with quite extensively came out this last fall, and I'm not sure where the money actually, well, a lot of it came from the federal government, was on cover crops. The federal government is very interested in knowing what the economic return is to planting a cover crop. And so it took kind of a major shift for us because though a farmer had the information as cover crops, what they wanted to know was what's following the cover crop. So we had to identify this landmass, and this is a cover crop, and this is a crop that followed it. And so this is the first year we had that information, but I think that's going to prove to be some very interesting data. the federal government actually chose Minnesota to do that. It's the only place they're doing it right now. It's here in Minnesota. Put that money towards the value of cover crops. So,
Lately, it seems like that person is foolish to even have cattle because it's so easy just to raise your crop and sell it and go to Mexico for the winter.
well,
But in the bad years, maybe it'll change things.
you know,
I mean-
the last 3 years have been kind of an anomaly for higher commodity prices, corn and beans. You know, in the dairy world, we have some who buy all their corn, paid 7 3/4 or whatever this last year. By the time they got it delivered to the farm, generally speaking, they probably could buy it cheaper as cost of production or less. You know, until the last 3 years.
Forage is also kind of dying out in the dairy business, it seems like. And that's somewhat of a sad thing too, just for the economics of the
I don't know if it's
corn
dying
silage.
out. We may be feeding a higher ration of corn silage.
Yeah.
Used to be 50-50. It's probably not there anymore, mostly just because of the cost efficiency of getting 25 or 30 tons to an acre versus 5 tons or 10 tons of haylage. So it's just really a matter of a cost thing. But I think in this part of the world, what's always concerned me, I guess, Lynn, is these counties along the river should have, in my opinion, a very genuine interest in livestock.
I've always tried to have alfalfa, even now without the cows, I put some alfalfa in my TMR.
But if you didn't
steers.
have any cattle anywhere, you would be feeding corn, doing corn and beans.
And the problem we have here, believe it or not, is our ability to make consistent, high-quality feed is actually less than what it is out in the Dakotas on a dry hay
Hay-wise,
basis.
for sure. Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So that's why you see a lot of hay bought out of the Dakotas to all these big dairies. Because they can produce dry hay for that effective fiber that they want, that
that's
ADF,
why
that
the-
rumen mat.
Wrapped brown bales don't have the cows.
So that's why it's always difficult for anybody around here. But you get in Wisconsin, there's a lot of custom hay producers. You get over here, there isn't as many. But again, it's that economic driver on the haylage aspect and a place to go farther out with manure and everything else. It's that boom that cattle create, and it gives the cash cropper an opportunity to get back into a three-way rotation. It's just so, you got to get out of here to go see it happen and go talk to the guys that do this and produce for these farms. They're just, when they do have low commodity prices, they've got a set rate that these farms are paying them because they're like, oh man, I'm so glad now I have alfalfa. I don't want that $2 corn.
A lot of those places will irrigate so they get consistent with dry weathers. Back when I was a kid, we could make dry hay easier. Today, it just seems like, boy, it's tough to get. Of course, our yields are higher, so you have a longer drying time to get that hay to dry like you would have, back in the 50s or 60s.
Yeah.
So we harvest an awful lot of haylage or baleage.
Yeah. And buy in the dry hay.
Buying the dry hay, which is probably going to come in at about 3 pounds per cow per day. That's a dry hay. Like I say, a lot of it for the fiber.
I did some cost evaluations and I found that with the cost of square baling now, if you have to use acid, if it's like 25%, it's actually less expensive for me to wrap, but, round bales, but then, I don't know, plastic now hasn't gone up that much to make it not so, but I mean, that could change things as it goes too.
Yeah, when you create something, there's always something else, right? So you look at the plastic bags, the bunker covers, all kind of things. Now we got to deal with the plastic, and so there's a lot of focus on that in the last few years, is how we recycle that plastic and service that need, so it doesn't end up all over the place.
But things always change, I guess that's the
Yep.
thing to remember, you need to cost it out every year practically.
Yep. Any questions? I appreciate your time. I know you got other things to get to today, and so I don't want to
Yeah, thank
take up your
you.
time.
Everything's
That was awesome. Very
Thank you
good.
for the funding of our farms to be a part of it, and they greatly appreciated that, and they're well aware of where those funds came from, so
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On to C, Whitewater Drinking Water Protection Grant Update.
Okay, so we have, this is the grant that, right now, on the books, it's expiring at the end of this year. I am going to see if I can get an extension for another year for that to try and spend down the funds. And this grant, originally, we had cover crops, and septic system upgrades available through that. And now I've expanded that to well sealing as well, because that's all related with drinking water protection. And so I will know more at the June meeting if we are able to do the extension. And hopefully we'll have that to be able to approve as an amendment. So that's all I have for that as an update.
Okay,
And that's where Tyler Burke is getting his septic system taken care of.
perfect, good.
And you want me to go on to the next one?
Yeah, let's,
Okay.
any discussion on that? Okay, let's move on to D.
Okay, local advisory team grant. This is the one working with Altura, Utica, and Elgin because they're all in level 2 for the drinking water protection or groundwater protection. And Utica is kind of on pause right now, and we alluded to that earlier because wait until see with that new well that's drilled, how that might change potentially the boundaries of the Duisma. And so that's that. The other two have their meetings at the end of June. And so we're at the point now where we're looking for input from the farmers that are participating to develop, finding out what are the best management practices that work well for them and what best management practices have not worked well, because those are off the table if they don't work. And starting to develop that list that gets sent up to the Commissioner of Department of Ag. And I had hoped that I would have had today a new grant to fund that for running into next year and the year after. However, the person who was working on grants has been ill for a time, but we should be able to have that at the June meeting. So that'll, because right now our grant goes until the end of June of this year. So this will be extending it 2 years. And under that new grant, we are planning on.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. We are planning on among the three Duismas, 17 meetings with farmers and 5 field days.
Oh. We don't know when those meetings, we haven't,
Well, Elgin and Altura are at the end of June. The last Tuesday of June is Elgin, and the last Wednesday, the day after, is Altura, 10 to 12.
you want to just send that? Is that
Sure.
in here? Just send that.
I can send that to you.
So these local advisory teams are, I guess, a couple questions. Number one, are they well attended by producers in the Duisma? And secondly, is there good open discussion, or is everybody kind of biting their tongue?
Well, and Mike and Don, they have been doing most of the presenting at the last meetings in February. We've had a hydrogeologist from the Department of Health talk about the specific geology of those specific Duismas. And that's one thing that Don and Mike, anytime that they're presenting, we take notes, but we don't say who said what. That's the rule. And, because we do want open and candid conversations. And so I think to this point, it appears that way. It seems like the Utica meeting, trying to think of, there was something going on. There was another event going on that same day that we didn't know about till, so that was really low. But Altura and Elgin both have been pretty well attended. I would say about 9 to 10 farmers, which I think is pretty good. And yeah, there have been some very good conversations. The people that have been attending, they ask excellent questions and very probing. I mean, which I think is good because they have a right to know, and we need to all understand what's going on. So, yes, I would say they're fairly well attended. The Elgin one, the one, and this kind of came up a little bit, there is one large feedlot in that Duisma, and they are not attending. And
You gotta wonder who that is.
yeah, so anyway, you know, that came out as kind of, well, this is kind of an elephant in the room. You know, we're primarily talking about what we are gonna do, but yet the one who could really do the most or isn't present and isn't in the room. And Mike is kind of, he will be meeting with them individually, and saying, this is what we're doing, and, you know, so it's not that, you know, and I know everybody's busy, and that's kind of hard, getting everybody in the same room at the same time. And so that's kind of how he is approaching it. So, you know, so they will know what's going on, and Mike will get input from them as well.
The consensus, this is a multifold thing that I've heard feedback, is obviously you've got a group of people that, you know, like, hey, this isn't a bad thing, and, you know, those are things. And then I'm going to just try to put this into words from the different responses I've gotten, and maybe try to sum it up.
Great.
And this isn't a direct quote from anybody, but it's just kind of how I put it together in my head from the different conversations that I've had is, oh, great, I'm supposed to take the blame for, we have no idea where or why, but they drew a circle and my neighbor can do whatever he wants right there, and I have to abide by this law to fix something that I have nothing to know if I even have something to do with it or not. I'm at a displaced, unfair advantage to continue to farm. Why me? Why am I getting picked on just because somebody over there's got a problem? What the heck?
Yeah, that's why they are taking into account the lag time. How long do the practices that are occurring right now take to get to that well?
And the conversation is if it doesn't work by limiting us, how big does the circle keep going out until all the circles touch? And then it just becomes regulation. This is how we farm.
Well, sadly,
And that's the fear.
when there's no uniform punitive controls, and how can you even for sure know what's going on everyone's farm necessarily?
So that's
but then you get people that are early adopters that come up at meetings and say, how come there's no payment in this plan for the people that have already been doing it for 10 years? And that seems unfair too.
Yep.
And you almost
Sure.
better just pull out the moldboard plow so you can go in for the big payday then a year later or 2 years later.
That's exactly
Yeah,
right.
it's complicated.
And so there's all of these different things that are happening, and this is literally what happens when government gets involved with private, because there's so many issues. And this is why I go back to education over regulation. This is this first step in regulation, and it's only going to continue. This is what scares me. To me, the SWCD boards, to me, these Whitewater Joint Power Boards, we represent the people. We are for the people. And we're getting put in positions to become authoritative. And I've argued this with the buffer law, that I never had a position. I never wanted to be in an authoritative position as an SWCD member. I wanted to help, but now we have to go around and regulate it. We have to police. That takes, to me, it pulls credibility of what we're trying to do away when we have to become the enforcement agency. And we're not at enforcement yet with these duismas, but eventually it's going to come. It's already in the law, and who's going to do it? And then when we are out knocking on the door saying, hey, would you like to talk cover crops? Heck no, I don't want to sign up. I don't want to do anything you all get going, because I know where that leads. And that is, to me, does that make sense? Am I saying this right?
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
But regards to the feedlot operator, I think he's pretty well educated. He had public hearing on his feedlot permit, which I attended. He's aware of the Duisma. he understands that what's happening today may take 20, 25 years to affect the water. I don't, I don't want to say he's ignorant or ignoring it.
No, I don't think he is. No.
But I'm sure it's kind of tough when you're in that position to be
Focused
at
on-
an advisory board. I mean, you're,
Mhm.
so
Yeah,
I'll just leave it at that.
yeah.
Yeah, and so that's the feedback that I've had is from, well, I just got a phone call yesterday back about the buffer law again and saying, well, why are you guys in charge of telling me what to do? Where did that come into play? How come the SWCD is telling us what to do? I didn't think that was their position. And I said, well, you know what runs downhill? And eventually fell in our lap.
You think it'd be better if the state was enforcing the laws then? I mean, who should enforce the laws?
Yeah. And that's the difficult part is, to me, we shouldn't be biased to any of these things, and we can help design different things. But my fear is that when this thing doesn't work and the circle goes out further and that farmer isn't complying with the BPMs, then who's going to be the police? Who's going to go? Who's the policing force? And that's why I keep beating on this drum, saying I just don't feel that we are in that position. I'm not a law officer. I'm not appointed to do anything. I'm just a supervisor. And we never got put in a position to do that. So I feel like it's trickling down our way, and we're going to get put in a position where we have to be the enforcement agency. And like I kept saying about the buffer law, that was an easy one, farmers. It's only going to get worse if you all don't change. So we need to educate ourselves and figure out these things. And I'm going to keep beating on that drum because I do not want the integrity of these local groups and the SWCDs to go away and become enforcement agencies.
I think the reason is they need someone with eyes on the ground that knows the difference, because if they send out a bunch of
I get why.
publishers from
Yeah.
St. Paul?
the cities, well then, how do they even know? if
Oh, I
it's
get
right?
why they're doing it.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's going to compromise the integrity and how people look
No, it
at their
puts the
SWCDs.
adversarial feelings
That's
in
right.
between.
And now all of a sudden, when we're on the door to actually do some good, they're going to be like, heck no, we know what it is. We know what.
Right, but
Yeah.
going back to what it said, I mean, if I'm a farmer and it's a choice between my SWCD guy knocking on my door, talking to me about what I'm doing wrong, or somebody from the MPCA coming down, I'd rather talk to you about fixing what's going on.
Yeah.
The guy from St. Paul who's just ready to start finding.
Don't disagree. And today I see it that way. But if they continue to put us into an enforcement agency, I think we're going to be looked at that sort of person. And that's what I want to make sure we don't have happen, is that they don't put us in these positions to start being the regulatory or being the police for these programs they want us to put into place
But I still haven't heard what the alternative is. What is it?
for BPMs.
No, for enforcement, who should do it? I don't
That's
know.
what we can't ever seem to get an answer
Well, I know,
to.
that's what we need to come to. So
Yeah.
I know you don't want SWCD to be the enforcement, who are you proposing should enforce?
That's the thing. If they created the law, they need to dictate.
Well, be careful what you wish for.
Well, my idea, just saying something I brought up years before, like an 85 farm program, where people didn't follow proper practices for highly erodible land, and they wouldn't get government payments, so it wouldn't be like enforcement. It would just be saying, we got this pile of money, but
You don't get
you
it.
just don't get it. It's not enforcement, it's, if you're not doing things in a sustainable manner, you just
Yep.
don't get it, and that would make people change.
And at the same
Nobody wants to
time,
do
when
that
the
either.
There you go.
85 farm bill
Yeah.
was being written, that was gonna be the last farm bill ever.
Mhm.
Sure. But I mean, it could get to the point where counties outside the SWCD enforce the laws. You're either rated as an A farmer or a B farmer or a C farmer, and then you're taxed based on what your rating is. So if you're following the regulations, you're gonna pay less per acre in taxes.
That's
Yeah.
interesting.
It's to me, I don't know if there is a good answer. I don't know if there is something in, but I'm going to fight back for the integrity of the SWCD because it was never brought in by a taxpayer commission to be a regulation organization. It was brought in to be the benefit of helping do certain projects and not regulation. And they're slowly starting to turn us into a regulation board.
So it could
And
be-
we have to answer back.
Land
I mean,
use tax base.
Yep.
I
Yeah.
like that.
so
Maybe set up the whole county as a TIF and provide TIF relief like cities do to farmers that do things according to plans and not provide that relief for those who don't.
Because my fear is if they turn us into that sort of board, it's the taxpayers that are funding it, and they can just as easily get rid of us. And I don't want to get rid of the SWCDs. I think they're too beneficial. And it's the same reason why taxing authority scares me, because you get the wrong group of people in there and go gangbusters, and then the people say, no, we don't want that anymore. And now you just dissolve your SWCD. And so there's always this fine line between all those things, in my opinion, and I just want to keep hounding that and keep bringing that to light, that I just hope we don't turn into this enforcement agency. The things that we're doing are good, but how the public perceives them, how the landowner perceives them, is going to be based on, are we coming in with genuinely trying to help, or are we creating law?
Sure. I mean, if I'm a farmer and someone's knocking my door and all they're doing is giving me good news, I'm happy to see them. But sometimes if I'm not following regulations, someone's gonna knock on my door and not have good news.
And I don't know how many people have called you, Mark, with like the buffer laws, how much you've had to deal with that.
I mean, not much. You know, originally when it was first put in, the buffer law, we had some pushback, but.
I mean, personally called you and had to sit there and deal with the conversations and say, how come you're the guy that has to tell me how to run my land? And those conversations get really hard when you say, look, I never was the
It's a
one
state
to
law,
do
yeah.
that. That's right. But yet, who's answering the questions for the state
But it's no
law?
different than,
You know,
I don't want to drag this out, but I mean, when the state passes a law and it's a local deputy that has to enforce it, you know, so.
but he's getting paid as an enforcement agency.
Yeah.
We are not enforcement agency.
You might become one.
That's what I don't
Well, I
want.
know, but
Right,
Yeah, that's what I don't want.
it's still the same law. I mean, if I get pulled over for speeding by a
Yeah.
state trooper or deputy, it's.
But he's hired to be an enforcement agency. We are not hired to be an enforcement agency.
Can I
There's a
call a
difference.
question?
You can, yeah, and that's okay, and I agree with that. But yeah, I'm gonna pound on it till the day I get off these boards. I'm scared that that's what's gonna happen with these local boards. They've never had the intent to do that. So I've never seen it in anything anywhere that was what we were intended to do. So I think we're here to help. All right, any other discussion on that?
No.
Winlac watershed planning update.
Okay, the WinLAC, One Watershed, One Plan was approved by Bowser on March 22nd. And the policy committee met on the 10th, and they approved what I included in the end of the packet, the 2-pagers table. That's the budget that they approved at their meeting. Just to kind of tie in with some of the discussions earlier, some of the things that we did not include in this particular work plan, because we have a shorter timeline to spend it than the next funding cycle, and we wanted to be able to fund things that will move fast and get spent. We did not include septic systems and did not include well ceilings, and because those are already funded very well with other programs that are already going on. And but 60% of our allocation was $577,696.
Is that for 2 years?
Yes.
Okay.
And however, that is determined by legislature, and there's a formula and part of the it's plugged into the formula is the number of private acres that are within that watershed. So because we're a smaller watershed, we get a lot less than what the Root or the Zumbro are getting. But we did hear that from Adam Bielke, our board conservationist, that they're looking at the formula for how the funds are allocated, and they're considering groundwater vulnerability as another factor. If that happens, the next funding cycle will probably get more, because we do have vulnerable groundwater. But anyway, that's our total amount allocated. And 60% of the monies went towards cost share expenses, whether it's different structural practices, non-structural management practices. Livestock waste management, we limited that to just $30,000 because we didn't want all the money getting sucked up into 1 or 2 projects. And this will be just low-cost fixes, and we stipulated that only if there's other funding sources available as well to that landowner. So we wanted to make sure that we kept that kind of in a box and not let it get unwieldy. $25,000 for urban stormwater practices, cities of Winona, La Crescent, St. Charles, and Wabasha. Forestry practices, we put in $350 per cost for a plan to writing forest stewardship plans for landowners. And then about 18% of the funds were dedicated towards technical assistance. And that's for the SWCDs so that they can get their staff time accounted for to assist for putting in these different projects. Also for the TSA, the regional TSAs, $25,000 for them. And then $25,000 for Fillmore County SWCD, because they have on staff 2 regional individuals that provide cover crop and grazing specialists. That's Dean Thomas, and then Sarah West for nutrient management plans, and she does throughout the. So we figured, we needed to pay our share for that service as well, and to compensate for that.
Is Dean who has our Truax drill?
He might.
Because we were talking about that the last meeting, trying to figure out a new home for that. I think that
Yeah.
Dean that has it.
Okay.
So I'm trying to figure out where to go with that, or who to donate it to.
That's a good idea.
Pheasants Forever, something
Yeah.
to house it and use it. So when people need it throughout the Tri-County area,
Yep.
we have it.
Okay.
So
What was that?
the Truax drill. So it's kept. I think
Oh,
Dean
drill,
has it,
okay.
the drill, and so I offered to keep it at my facility in St. Charles, just tentatively, just so we got a spot there. We can stick it under one of the sheds, or roofs, but. Yeah, so he's kind of tired of dealing with it. And I think it was Dean that has it.
Okay.
And
Okay.
yeah, Fillmore. Yeah. And so just the maintenance and everything, but it's Ross Graydon said, hey, we don't want to lose this thing, and a few other guys.
Dean Tollefson.
Was that Dean Tollefson or is it Dean
I
Tom?
thought
Is it
that was
Dean
what the
Tollefson?
discussion was.
Okay, I couldn't remember which
He's
Dean
the
it
one
was.
who maintains it currently.
Is that who it is?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Didn't fit right in. my
FYI
mind,
for
right?
and I couldn't remember the ins and outs of that. But FYI, that Truax drill, that kind of gets shared throughout for a lot of especially for the small, like prairie plantings, the 2-3 acre type scenarios that most people can't do those things. So they're trying to figure out what to do with that drill. So it's a little side note. So.
Yep. And we set aside $45,000 for project development, and we have 3 projects in mind. One was to identify potential flood control projects for the future into the next funding cycle. And then this is in Olmsted County, the North Fork Whitewater. I know Skip was kind of in Marion area where they're working near the trail. This is one where I had done a grant proposal with the Whitewater to help support that, but didn't get it. But Skip was looking for some engineering design work, because there's an area where it's really kind of a tight spot between the trail, the road, and the stream, and we need some extra design. So we set some money aside for that. And then also to develop a program to permanently protect bluffland areas, for example, through a RIM program or something like that. And that one is being worked on right now. Amanda Gentry is part of that team, and Jen Walls, and I forget who else, but they're trying to put something together that makes sense for the bluffland areas in southeast Minnesota. And so put some money towards that. And education, and we have $25,000 directed for that, but we also have some money from MPCA that's not within this grant that we can use for education and outreach events, whether it's field days or communications to landowners about different things that are identified in our plan as a high priority. And then 10% for administration. So that would be between Winona County and Fillmore, or, well, not Fillmore, but Root River SWCD as the fiscal. So that is the plan that we have worked up right now. And so I'm going to try and look for opportunities for the Whitewater per se to help with pieces of the Whitewater for this.
Question on urban stormwater. You've got cities of Winona, Crescent, St. Charles, and Wabasha.
Mm-hmm.
That's just for this first initial fund pot? Okay.
Yep.
Because I know Plainview is split kind of
Yes.
broadly and
Yeah.
south of town. There's a lot of issues going on with
Yeah.
water.
Right.
So,
Yeah. And so this.
Period. There's just a lot of water issues, period.
right.
Yeah.
It's a swamp.
It is. It
The whole
really is.
city is on a swamp.
Right. And the whole idea was to put these funds towards where we could get it spent sooner than later. And so now, one of the things that we've done is we had some contingency funds left over in the grant. And the planning grant ends at the end of June. And Houston Engineering is going to help us put together a tailored spreadsheet similar to what the Zumbro has for ranking projects. And then also, because we used PTM app to develop the plan, Houston Engineering has a spreadsheet and they call it the BEAST. Benefits estimator and something, whatever. Yeah, but it's a beast and it's big. So the planning work group will be working with them in the next couple of weeks trying to put this together, so that my goal is that once we're into implementation mode, is that we have a consistent way to track progress on the grant, and being able to be in a much better position to report at the 5-year assessment point. And so that's kind of the goal with that right now. And that's all I have.
Nice.
Okay. Bringing in our next meeting.
June 15th.
We got her.
No
Okay.
agency reports?
Shouldn't be. Nobody's here.
Yep.
Anything else? Unless
I
somebody
won't.
submitted.
No, nobody submitted.
Adjourn.
Motion made by Bob, second by Mark for adjourn. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.